Hello gentlemen and ladies. How are you warriors? I hope today is a great day for everybody. In collaboration with the Special Operations Training Institute, I want to welcome you to another episode of the RKMCS Criminology Lecture Series. My name is Phoenix, and I am your discussant for this episode. In this presentation, I will provide you with a list of the top 12 counter-terrorism operations for which we have learned a lot of lessons, and the greatest respect and recognition for the operatives. Our objective here is to demonstrate the success and failures of these counter-terrorism operations that have shared positive lessons with many of us. They are our benchmarks for our counter-terrorism specialization training activities. We give credit to Evie Barker's article, The 10 Momentous Counter-Terrorism Operations, dated the 2nd of April 2013. I am going to present them based on the dates of events starting from oldest to the latest. In addition, we picked 2 counter-terrorism operations held in Philippine soil for emphasis of what our local operatives can be capable of, recognizing their bravery and courage in fighting domestic terrorism. Number 1. Operation Wrath of God, and Operation Spring of Youth, in response to the Munich massacre in 1972. One of the most infamous failed attempts at counter-terrorism occurred at the September 1972 Munich Olympic Games. It was the first Olympics to be held in Germany since the Nazi era, so security was intentionally relaxed in order to present an open and friendly image. But this proved costly. At 4:30 a.m. on September 5, a group of 8 Palestinian terrorists from the Black September group climbed over the fence surrounding the Olympic Village. They shot and killed Israeli wrestling coach Moshe Weinberg and weightlifter Yosef Romano, which left them with 9 Israeli hostages, a mix of athletes and trainers as well as a weightlifting judge. A huge tactical error was then made when German police were filmed on live TV getting into position to attack the kidnappers, thus alerting them to what was coming, which forced the first rescue attempt to be called off. Next, authorities pretended to agree to the Palestinians' demands to be transported to Cairo and arranged for them to be taken to Furstenfeldbruck Air Base. The authorities planned to ambush the attackers when they arrived there. However, the police underestimated the number of terrorists and were poorly coordinated and under-trained, which resulted in a bloody fiasco. 2 of the kidnappers were killed by gunfire, while the 6 others took cover. A German policeman was also killed. Then around midnight, following the arrival of armored personnel carriers, the remaining kidnappers massacred all 9 of their captives with automatic weapons and hand grenades. They then made a panicked attempt to escape in which 3 were shot dead, 1 having been tracked by police dogs, and 3 were captured. When the captured kidnappers were later released after the Lufthansa hijacking, the Israeli government responded with Operation Wrath of God and Operation Spring of Youth, hunting down Palestinians believed to be connected to the attack. The Munich incident is a lesson on how easy it is for a counter-terrorism operation to go badly cruel. Operation Wrath of God was also known as Operation Bayonet. It was a covert operation, authorized by Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir, directed to assassinate individuals involved in the Munich massacre, in which 11 members of the Israeli Olympic team were killed. The targets were members of the Palestinian armed militant group Black September and operatives of the Palestine Liberation Organization. The operation was believed to have continued for over 20 years. The first wave of assassinations from October 1972 to early 1973 caused alarm among Palestinian officials. But a more shocking one was the raid on Lebanon through Operation Spring of Youth in April 1973. The boldness of the mission made Israel known to be capable of striking anywhere, anytime. Number 2. Operation Entebbe, 1976. Also called Operation Thunderbolt. On June 27, 1976, an Air France flight carrying 248 people was hijacked and flown to Entebbe Airport in Uganda by members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and German terrorist organization Revolutionary Cells. The hijackers were aided by pro-Palestinian Ugandan forces, who allowed at least a further 4 hijackers to join the group. Although 148 non-Jewish hostages were released over the next few days, over 100 Jewish and Israeli prisoners, as well as the pilot, remained in the terrorists' controls. The militants demanded the release of 53 prisoners who were being held in Israel and other countries. They gave a deadline of July 1, after which, they warned, they would start killing the hostages. The Israeli government managed to extend the deadline by announcing that they would be entering into negotiations, while secretly planning a dangerous raid to rescue the hostages. A task force of around 100 Israeli commandos was dispatched to Entebbe airport in transport aircraft. Driving a black Mercedes that resembled Ugandan President Amin's car and Land Rovers like those in Amin's entourage, the commandos managed to get through the airport checkpoint with minimal incident. They then stormed into the airport terminal, successfully rescuing all but 3 hostages, killing all the terrorists, and destroying 30 fighter planes belonging to the Ugandan Air Force. The commander of the assault team, Lieutenant Colonel Yonatan Netanyahu, was the only Israeli fatality during the operation. International opinion was split, with the Arabic and communist world seeing the raid as an example of international aggression, whereas Western countries hailed it an act of self-defense. Number 3. Operation Fire Magic. On October 13, 1977, Lufthansa Flight 181 was seized in mid-air by 4 hijackers from the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a group of left-wing extremists. The attackers forced the plane to fly to various destinations for refueling, including Rome, Larnaca, Bahrain and Dubai, before they reached Mogadishu in Somalia on October 17. The hijackers had already executed the plane's captain for failing to follow instructions, so the West German government knew that they needed to act quickly to save the remaining people on board. Without permission from the Somali government, a group of 30 members of the West German counter-terrorist group CSG-9 were flown to Mogadishu under the code name Feuerzauber, German term for fire magic. And thanks to negotiations, they were allowed to land. The plan was to approach the plane using its blind spot and then enter it via its escape hatches and doors. Early in the morning on October 18, Somali soldiers started a diversionary fire ahead of the aircraft. Commandos then burst into the plane, killing 2 of the terrorists at the scene, mortally wounding a third, and capturing the 4th. All 86 remaining hostages were escorted safely from the scene, and German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt was commended for his decision to take action. Number 4. Operation Nimrod, in response to the Iranian embassy siege, 1980. On April 30, 1980, a group of 6 men carrying weapons burst into the Iranian embassy in London and took 26 hostages. The militants, members of the radical Iranian terrorist group the Democratic Revolutionary Front for the Liberation of Arabistan (DRFLA), demanded the release of 91 Arab prisoners being held in Khuzestan, Iran, as well as a safe route out of the country. Negotiations dragged on for the next 6 days. And while the release of 5 hostages was secured, on May 5, angry at the lack of progress and suspecting that the British government was planning something, one of the hostages was executed and the body was thrown out of the building. The go-ahead was given for the SAS to rescue those inside the embassy, with the mission codenamed Operation Nimrod. At 7:23 p.m., one team of SAS troopers lowered themselves down from the roof, while another team eased a stun grenade into the building using a skylight. In the brutal battle that followed, 5 of the militants were killed, 1 was arrested, and a further hostage died, with 2 others wounded. Policeman Trevor Locke, who had been taken hostage, won the Gorge Medal for tackling militant leader Own Ali Muhammad during the operation to stop him from attacking SAS soldiers. The raid, which was broadcast live on a public holiday, was seen by millions of people across the UK, and it was an important moment in British history, especially for the SAS. The SAS regiment was overwhelmed with potential new recruits, and Sergeant John McAleese, who led Operation Nimrod, is regarded as a national hero. Number 5. Raid on Garuda Indonesia Flight 206. 1981. The hijacking of Garuda Indonesia Flight 206 was carried out by members of Commando Jihad, a group of Islamic extremists from Indonesia. On March 28, 1981, 5 members of the group took control of a DC-9 aircraft on an Indonesian internal flight and ordered that they be taken to Colombo, Sri Lanka. However, after refueling in Malaysia, the plane changed course and headed to Bangkok's Don Mueang Airport. There, the terrorists demanded $1.5 million and the release of imprisoned members of their insurgent group. In order to rescue the 57 hostages, a dozen Kopassus commandos from Indonesia's army were flown into Bangkok. On April 1, they stormed the plane, shooting and killing 4 of the hijackers. Another of the hijackers died on a flight to Jakarta for unknown reasons. The leader of the militants, Imran bin Muhammad Zian, was tried and handed the death sentence in Jakarta a few weeks afterwards. No passengers were killed in the mission, although the pilot was shot and later died. Number 6. Ashalay Loro hijacking. The October 7, 1985 hijacking of Italian cruise ship, the Ashalay Loro stunned the world. Four armed Palestinian Liberation Front (PLF) militants took control of the ship in the waters off Egypt and demanded that 50 Palestinian prisoners being held in Israeli custody be released. On October 8, after being denied permission to dock at Tartus in Syria, the PLF militants carried out their most shocking act, the execution of Leon Klinghoffer, a 69-year-old retired Jewish man in a wheelchair. The militants forced members of the ship's crew to throw Klinghoffer's body and wheelchair overboard. On October 10, the boat arrived at Egypt's Port Said, whereupon the Egyptian government agreed to give the hijackers safe passage aboard a commercial airliner in exchange for the hostages. However, following orders issued by U.S. President Ronald Reagan, the airliner was intercepted on its way to Tunisia by F-14 Tomcats and forced to land at a NATO base in Sicily. The four PLF militants were arrested, although the mastermind behind the plan, Mohammed Zaidan, managed to escape. Number 7. Operation Chavin de Wintar, in response to the Japanese embassy hostage crisis, 1996 Peru. This 126-day siege began on December 17, 1996 when members of the Movimiento Revolucionario Tupac Amaru or MRTA, a Peruvian Marxist revolutionary group, stormed the residence of the Japanese ambassador in Lima and took hundreds of high-profile diplomats, officials and businesspeople hostage. The guerrillas issued a series of demands to the government of Peru, including reform of the country's neoliberal economic policies and the release of comrades of theirs from Peruvian jails. Negotiations between the two parties continued for several months, but in the meantime, Peruvian President Alberto Fujimori was secretly having a commando team trained to rescue the hostages. The mission was codenamed Operation Chavin de Wintar. In preparation for the attack, mini microphones and video recorders were sneaked into the hostages. They were also smuggled light-colored clothing to distinguish them from the militants. On April 22, 1997, more than 4 months after the takeover, 140 commandos charged into the residence with the help of well-placed explosive charges. All 14 MRTA members were killed, and all but one of the hostages were successfully rescued. 2 Peruvian commandos were also killed in the attack. The spectacular rescue was marred by reports that a number of the guerrillas had been executed after surrendering. Nevertheless, Fujimori was initially praised for the ruthless efficiency of the assault. His domestic approval ratings soared to 70%, and he was celebrated as a national hero. Number 8. Operation Black Tornado. On November 26, 2008, at around 8 p.m., 10 members of Pakistan-based militant group Lashkar-e-Taiba came ashore at 2 separate sites in Mumbai, using high-performance inflatable boats. Over the next few days, they staged a dozen well-planned shooting and bombing attacks throughout the city. Each terrorist was equipped with an AK-47, an automatic revolver, 8 grenades, credit cards, and a substantial amount of ammunition. Local police seemed relatively ineffective in stopping the attacks, although members of the Mumbai Anti-Terrorism Squad managed to pursue 2 of the insurgents from Shivaji Terminus station, killing one and arresting another, Ajmal Kasab, following running gun battles. By the morning of November 27, the surviving terrorists were holed up in the Taj Hotel, the Oberoi Trident Hotel and Nariman House. India's elite National Security Guard (NSG) was called in. Eventually, the NSG and other security forces managed to eliminate the remaining terrorists in the hotels and Nariman House and rescue hundreds of hostages. All 3 buildings were declared cleared on November 29, after the final siege had concluded at the Taj Hotel. Delhi-based NSG forces were denounced for taking 10 hours to get to the sites. During the attacks, hundreds of people were wounded and at least 166, mainly civilians, were killed. All the terrorists were dispatched, with Kasab later executed. Number 9. Operation Jack. 2008 Operation Jack was a bold counter-terrorist mission carried out on July 2, 2008 to rescue a group of 15 hostages held captive by the Colombian guerrilla organization Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia (FARC). Those being held comprised 3 American military contractors, former presidential candidate Ingrid Betancourt, and 11 members of the Colombian police force and military. The hostages had been held for anywhere between 5 and 10 years. To prepare for the operation, a spy was reportedly planted within the guerrilla organization at least 1 year before the raid. The hostages were also kept under extensive surveillance using motion detectors and video cameras. The rescue mission involved tricking members of FARC into believing that a group of Colombian soldiers were members of a non-government organization who would fly their hostages to a fellow rebel leader. 2 helicopters carrying soldiers in disguise as cameramen, journalists, guerrilla fighters and aid workers arrived at the landing area in Guaviare where they were met by militants. Once the hostages were loaded on board and the choppers were in the air, the soldiers successfully captured the 2 escorting militants. No shots were fired, and all 15 hostages were evacuated safely. Number 10. Special Operation Lopo de Gorge, 2012. This event involves terrorists whose origins and motives remain largely a mystery. What is known is that on August 26, a group of around 17 armed men took 5 locals hostage from a remote village in the Georgian district of Entebbe. Their actions sparked the bloodiest incident in Georgia since the country's 5-day battle with Russia in August 2008. According to reports, on August 28, the armed men then captured members of the Georgian Border Patrol. A higher-ranking patrol guard offered himself as a hostage, so long as everyone else was released. Thanks to his quick thinking, the militants let the civilians and the rest of the patrol go. Later, the kidnappers swapped the border guard for a Georgian Interior Ministry official. The group were then lured to an ambush site, and a government sniper killed one of them. This prompted a gunfight in which 3 Georgian soldiers were killed and 5 others were wounded. However, in the end all of the hostages were successfully rescued, while 10 of the remaining militants were killed and 1 was captured. The identity of the group involved is still unknown. Media speculations include Chechen militants and Dagestani insurgents, while early reports simply referred to them as saboteurs. The operation was officially concluded on October 30, following the burial of 4 of the suspected perpetrators. Number 11. Ashalay Ultimatum, 2006. As a backgrounder, Gaddafi Janjalani was among the highest-ranking leaders of the Abu Sayyaf group, an Islamic fundamentalist group operating in the Philippines. He was responsible for the kidnappings and deaths of some Filipino and American citizens. He has been associated with the kidnappings of the Burnham couple and 2 other U.S. citizens. He was directly responsible for the beheading of Guillermo Sobero, another U.S. citizen. Janjalani has also planned and implemented many attacks against U.S. interests. Specifically, he was linked with the attacks of the U.S. Embassy in Manila, the Superferry 14, and the Valentine's Day bombings, which in total killed or injured hundreds of innocent people. By early 2000s, government counter-terrorism operations eliminated most ASG commanders. Such operations by the Philippine military resulted to a vacuum of leadership within the ASG. This enabled Abdu Rajak Janjalani's younger brother, Gaddafi Janjalani, to take control of the ASG. Strengthened by operational and monetary support from Southeast Asian terrorist groups like Jamaah Islamiyah, the younger Janjalani redirected ASG to begin bombing again in late 2003. Through the U.S.-backed military operation known as Ashalay Ultimatum, large-scale bombings ended with Janjalani's death and neutralization of Abu Sulaiman, in September 2006. Number 12. Ashalay Exodus. Ashalay Exodus took place on Sunday, January 25, 2015 in Mamasapano, Maguindanao. The operation was initiated by the Special Action Force of the Philippine National Police against the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters, and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. The operation was intended to capture or kill wanted Malaysian terrorist Zul Kifli Abdir, also known as Marwan, and other Malaysian terrorists or high-ranking members of the BIFF. The SAF operation led to a bloody encounter with the militant groups which led to the death of the main target Marwan, but at the same time, the demise of 44 brave SAF troopers. The mission itself was declared successful since the target was neutralized, but the ensuing firefight resulted in a tactical victory of MILF forces against the PNP-SAF. The severity of the policemen's situation prompted the government peace panel to intervene, and requested a ceasefire from the MILF. The armed forces of the Philippines also conducted a rescue operation to save the remaining 29 SAF survivors who were encircled by the enemies. In February 2017, President Rodrigo Duterte declared January 25 of every year as the National Day of Remembrance for the SAF 44. Now, we picked up 8 key lessons learned from these counter-terrorism operations. They are as follows. 1. Intelligence product must be solid. The use and utilization of all forms of intelligence such as human, SIGINT, and ELINT are vital in every CT operation. There is a need to employment modern and high-tech equipment in CT operation, especially in gathering intelligence in the area of operation. Every operation must be based on solid intelligence product. 2. From need to know to need to share. Teamwork, inter-unit collaboration and cooperation are more than ever needed. International relations or network is a huge advantage. CT operation will highly likely succeed through sharing of intelligence and resources. 3. Target hardening plus defense in depth. Heightened security measures should always be made all seaports and sea vessels, airports and aircraft, special events and venues, borders, and other critical facilities or infrastructures. The presence of water assets, for instance, is significant because water can be a good entry point for the enemy. 4. Reaction speed matters. Counter-terrorism units must reach the scene of the incident the earliest time possible, after it has commenced. Swift reaction is indispensable to the success of the operation. The element of surprise is always key in the conduct of CT operations. 5. Every situation is unique. Therefore, every situation requires unique tactics. For instance, cruise ship security personnel must be highly trained on critical situations like hijacking. Knowledge of the concept of BBSS, visit, board, search and seizure operations is desirable. In maritime security, the team should be specialized in maritime boarding actions and tactics. Training must be as designed to capture enemy vessels, combat terrorism, piracy and smuggling, and to conduct customs, safety and other inspections. 6. Media management plus legal offensives. Media and broadcast management must be highly considered, as it can either make or break the operation. Knowledge of the legal matters shields the team from the hassles of litigation. 7. Sharpening the spear. This relates to continuous training on special tactics to enhancement of skills and technical know-how on new tactics and equipment. It should be made on regular basis on different scenarios. As they say, sharpening the saw matters. 8. The enemy is getting smarter. Never underestimate the enemy. Terrorist attack teaches us that our enemies are unpredictable. No matter who they are or what group they belong, we must treat them as highly capable and dangerous, and we expect to respond to their actions with efficiency. That ends my presentation. Thank you for watching and listening. Please subscribe and share this to others. We also invite you to join us on our counter-terrorism specialization programs. If you are interested, please contact our secretariat at www.criminologysolutions.com. Keep safe.